Genetically engineered food is the process in which includes taking the genetic material of one organism and permanently placing it into another organism. People use and consume genetically engineered food all the time. These include soybean, sugar beets, rice, dairy, corn, and cotton. My sources include compiled information from Professor Ron Epstein from the San Francisco State University and an article titled Expose the Great Genetically Modified Crops Myths by Jeffrey Leon, an environment editor. Genetically engineered foods will not end world hunger because genetically engineered crops produce less and complications will arise from crop contamination. Genetically engineering crops doesn't necessarily mean that more will be produced. The main goal of researchers is to create crops that are resistant to pests and pesticides. Studies have shown that genetically modified crops produce less than their normal non-genetically modified crops. According to the article Expose the Great Genetically Modified Crops Myth by Jeffrey Leon, a study that was carried out over 3 years at the University of Kansas found that genetically modified soya produced about 10% less food than its conventional equivalent. Another research by the University of Nebraska found that genetically modified soya produced 11% less than the non-genetically modified equivalent. The designers of the genetically modified soya said that they didn't make it to produce more, but they were working on one that produced more. This is unlikely because the process is more difficult. Also, when genetically modified technology was introduced for cotton crops in America, the production dropped. Genetically engineered crops aren't necessarily engineered to produce more. Sometimes they even produce less than their non-genetically modified equivalent. Crop contamination will create complications when genetically engineered seeds are introduced into fields. According to an article, 5 Reasons to Keep Britain and the Rest of the World Genetically Modified Free, compiled by Professor Epstein. If genetically engineered seeds are released, the altered crops will not be able to be contained. Government agencies try to keep contamination of genetically modified crops to a minimum by keeping genetically modified and non-genetically modified crops separated by a certain distance. But this is impossible because pollen can travel great distances. Therefore, genetically modified seeds can be found far away from their actual fields. A university in the UK published research showing that genetically modified pollen from the oilseed rape can travel up to 3 kilometers. Once non-genetically engineered crops are contaminated, it will only take one superbug to wipe out the world's food supply. Crossbreeding of herbicide-resistant, genetically engineered crops, weeds, will produce weeds that are resistant to herbicides, creating the superweed. Therefore, it will only take one superbug or one superweed to wipe out all the food in the world, because there is little to no diversity within the crops. Genetically engineered foods will not solve world hunger because genetically engineered crops do not produce more than their counterparts, and crop contamination will cause more complications than it will actually solve.